Very good afternoon. We are coming to you live from Nasrec in Johannesburg. As we have seen earlier on, the election results of the top 7 have been announced, and Cyril Ramaphosa remains the president of the ANC. Now, joining me today, we have Tshegofatso, who is from Tuks FM. Very interesting. It's a campus radio station, but let's hear more from her. A very good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, you're from Tuks FM.
Yes.
How does it feel being around all of these media houses, and how have you been? How has the conference been so far for you?
I mean, it's been amazing. I think on the first day, it was quite interesting to see how big it is.
Yeah.
I mean, we used to seeing such things on TV, and now like being here and seeing it in the flesh and seeing all of these like media marquees, seeing all the big names and getting to interact with them, I think it's been quite interesting.
So, tell me something. Campus-based
Yes.
radio station. Are you studying? What are you studying? You definitely have to be a student.
Yes,
so
definitely.
yeah.
So I'm studying BA General. I'm in first year. So yes, I only started university this year.
Oh.
But yeah, so that's currently what I'm doing now. We used to have a media school, but we don't have that anymore. So unfortunately, I could not pursue a degree in media studies at Tuks. But yeah, that's basically what I'm doing so far.
And why the interest to cover this conference, as huge as it is?
I mean, given our political climate in South Africa, I think it's just important that we kind of just keep up to date.
Yeah.
I think especially since like if you look at the voter turnout from last year, specifically youth-wise, we had about 1.8 million youth members that didn't even register to vote. That could have just easily rocked up, put that X and voted, and they just chose not to. But I think a huge contributing factor to that is the fact that a lot of youth members aren't necessarily aware of who's actually on their ballot paper. So I think it's just important for us to be aware, and I think it starts from just attending the simple conferences like the ANC elective conference. Yeah.
And how has that been? How is it being received by your viewers, who are predominantly, if not all, youth? How is it being received?
Well, it's definitely been received well. I think a lot of our youth followers, they definitely on our social medias. They are on our Twitter page, for example, and I think it helps to at least have that easy access to politics, which they don't necessarily receive elsewhere. And I think having that in a way that is very digestible to them allows them to engage better in politics, which is ultimately what we're trying to help them do.
We know the challenges that this country is facing, and I think you've also touched on the youth despondency.
Yes.
How do you think we address that issue?
I think the first thing is definitely transparency. I think the youth tend to run away when they hear big terms and big words, and sometimes it's just important to just break it down, explain to them that this is what's happening, this is why this is happening. And I think it becomes so much easier for the youth to just want to participate in politics. Also just explaining how each aspect of politics actually affects them, because I think a lot of people just assume that them not voting, for example, won't have any impact on them, and I think just explaining the importance of a vote, or the importance of just engaging in politics, or finding interest in politics and how that impacts their lives in just the simplest ways, I think that will have such a high impact.
Let's zoom into the ANC itself.
Yes.
Do you think the ANC is still relevant in the 21st century? And I'm asking you this not necessarily from a reporter perspective, but as two young people engaging. Do you think the ANC is still relevant in the 21st century?
I mean, I know we as young people, we probably don't think so, because I think when we look at history, for example, and how, their role was really to just cause some sort of revolution and cause some sort of change, revolt against the apartheid government, one would just argue that, they've served their purpose. And so there is no need for them to truly still be here. But again, the argument then lies, and I think a lot of youth members, for example, have this argument of, then if not them, then who?
Yeah.
And hence a lot of, young people choose not to vote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We saw Cyril Ramaphosa being re-elected.
Yeah.
What do you think about the new top 7? And also we saw an introduction of a second Deputy Secretary General. What do you think of that?
Well, I think I speak for a lot of youth members in saying that it was quite underwhelming in some sense. I think over the past few days it's been quite interesting battle, especially for the presidency position, where it was leading towards Kise at some point, and then at some point it moved to President Ramaphosa. So it's quite interesting to see how that played out. But I think from the perspective of seeing how many young people actually put themselves out there for the top 7 positions, and also later for the NEC positions, I think it gives a lot of young people hope, especially young people who do follow the ANC and are interested in the ANC. I think it gives them quite a bit of hope as well. Yeah.
Do you think the carpet that's been laid for young people to follow the footsteps of those who were contesting? Do you foresee ANC ever having a young president or a young person in the top 7, which is now the top 7? And by young, I mean someone under 35.
I mean, that is quite
stretching. It's a reach.
It is quite a reach,
Right.
because then, I think there are quite a few complex matters when it comes to the ANC. It goes beyond age. We've seen how there have been certain barriers, not just about age, but also about gender. Barriers that are kind of shifting. We have 3 of the top 7 members that are now women. So it does give us a little bit of hope. Maybe one day we will have, much younger people within the ANC. But again, one needs to look at, the ANC Youth League, seeing whether they are unified as well, whether they can put forth candidates within the next, elective conference that can actually stand for the youth and, represent us within the top 7.
Yeah. Let's just take it back to campus base now.
Yes.
We see a lot of student activism and something called the Progressive Youth Alliance, which would have those that are progressively aligned to the mother body, which would be the ANC. And the ANC considers that as a reservoir where they, extract their active members to, grow the movement.
Yes.
How active is student politics on campus? And I'd like you to compare that Progressive Youth Alliance vis-a-vis what we saw in recent years, the emergence of the Economic Freedom Fighter Student Command. Can you just do a comparative analysis?
Well, I mean, that's actually an excellent question. I think specifically where I come from, University of Pretoria, we've seen a gradual shift in terms of the leadership of, we've gone from, SASCO, and now we have the EFF student command now in power. So yes, we do see that gradual shift of people voting for something different, but also the activism. We're having quite a few issues. I know we had an issue of registration fee increases. That caused great revolts, specifically from political parties within the university space, but also from students. Who had faith in those political parties. So yes, that activism has carried forward, and who knows? I think it might even pave the way for political leaders in the future.
Yeah.
So it'll be quite interesting to see how that progresses. But yes, definitely, I think in the university space, there is quite a bit of activism. There is quite a bit of growth in terms of political action within that space.
Do you think the shift, this is my second to last question, I'm sorry, I don't want to put you on the spot. Do you think the shift from student leadership from the Progressive Youth Alliance to the EFF, do you think national politics had anything to do with it? Do you think students voted for the EFF because the EFF Student Command, because they had faith in the EFF, or was it to spite the Progressive Youth Alliance because of the national political landscape?
So that's actually quite an interesting question. It's quite interesting to see how there's a contrast between university politics and the politics of the greater South Africa. You think that because they just a junior subsector of that political party, that they would still represent the values, although they're supposed to. That isn't necessarily the case, and hence a lot of students don't necessarily vote for them because they are aligned to that particular party, but they vote for them in line with their policies and the lines that they run in accordance to students. So I think it's quite interesting to see how that contrast actually comes into play, and so I can't really say that students vote in alliance with the particular parties because of the fact that they're part of the grander scheme of politics of South Africa. Yeah.
Yep. And just as a last one, are there any young people, if we speak about young people in leadership, young people doing dynamic things across the country, are there any names that come to mind? Or up and coming, young people that we will see take South Africa forward? Are there any names that come to your mind?
Hmm. I mean, it's quite vague, you know. I think in a political sense, it's quite tricky
Not
because,
just so sorry, not just
yeah,
like
yeah.
a blanket approach, not necessarily just in the political space.
I mean, in the South African sense, I think it's quite tricky because I think our stance in terms of like social change has shifted quite a bit. You know, we've moved from people, you know, being activists in the sense of like more practical ways like protesting to now social media activism, you know, people posting on TikTok, you know, expressing themselves there. So I think it's quite tricky, you know. I think we're probably going to see a rise in a lot of our TikTok influencers, a lot of our TikTok influencers that, you know, explain the issues in the world and, you know, attack politicians. I think we might see a rise in that, and perhaps they could be our next future leaders. Who knows?
Interesting. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for joining us, Tshegofatso. That was Tshegofatso from Tuks FM. Very interesting. I think we also had a question posed as to who the youth leaders are, and very often we are not able to name names. It's very interesting what she touches on, the digital world. Will we see a rise of people from, example, your TikToks, people who sit behind the screen? Will we see the rise of those people actually taking us further? It's very interesting conversations that we've had. Tuks FM, that would be the University of Pretoria, of which we saw a rise a few years ago, just before Fees Must Fall, where students actually, under the Progressive Youth Alliance, gathered together and spoke about or called for hashtag Afrikaans must fall. Activism was really vibrant in that sense. Young people were actually up in arms, to be vocal. And will we see that in the future, not just of the ANC, but of the country in general? Do